You think you can humiliate me and walk away? The words echoed silently in the grand courtroom as Officer Ryan Cole stepped forward, his polished shoes tapping against the cold marble floor, his badge catching a streak of sunlight through the tall, arched windows. The air was thick with tension, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead blending with the soft shuffle of papers and the occasional cough from the wooden benches where spectators sat in uneasy anticipation. Senator Jasmine Brooks stood near the witness stand, her posture straight, her navy blazer crisp and flawless, and yet there was a calmness in her eyes, a quiet authority that made the whispering crowd still. Every eye in the room seemed to lock on her, not because of fear, but because of the sheer presence of someone who had been underestimated for too long. Ryan Cole's hand twitched as he glanced at her, his smirk fading as he tried to assert dominance, the words on his lips sharp and condescending. Yet there was a pause, almost imperceptible, as if the room itself had drawn a breath in anticipation. Jasmine's fingers rested lightly on the polished oak of the stand, her mind replaying the countless hours of preparation, of debates, and strategic maneuvers that had brought her here, each step carefully calculated, each glance measured. Outside, the sunlight shifted, casting fleeting patterns across the courtroom, highlighting the dust motes in the air, the small tremor in the papers scattered on the desk, a subtle reminder that nothing in this space was static. Ryan Cole leaned closer, his voice low but meant to be heard by all, a command disguised as a question. Yet there was no response from Jasmine except a measured inhale and the faintest lift of her chin, signaling awareness without yielding an ounce of vulnerability. She had seen this game before, the way power could be abused, the way assumptions could blind the untrained eye, and she waited, each second stretching longer as the whispers of the crowd grew into a muted chorus of expectation. Then, a small detail, almost missed, the glint of a badge tucked beneath her blazer, the faint shimmer of documents in her briefcase, the subtle but undeniable signs that she was not merely a figure on the bench, but a force within the very system he thought he controlled. Ryan's eyes flicked to the badge, uncertainty, seeping into the edges of his confidence. Yet he did not fully grasp the gravity of her presence. Jasmine allowed the silence to linger, letting each heartbeat of the room sync with her own measured rhythm, the anticipation building, palpable, as if the walls themselves leaned in to witness the quiet power. She shifted her weight slightly, the faintest movement, yet one that suggested readiness, control, and the capacity to respond in ways he could not predict. The crowd, held in rapt attention, felt the tension coil and stretch, a living thing in the room, waiting for the moment when the balance of authority would tilt. And in that stillness, Jasmine's gaze met his fully, unwavering, commanding, the embodiment of composed strength, and without a single word, the room seemed to recognize the inevitability of what was about to unfold, the silent echo of justice preparing to reclaim its rightful place in the hands of one who had long carried it with dignity and precision. The courtroom remained silent for a tense moment as Senator Jasmine Brooks adjusted the papers in front of her, the polished wood of the stand cold under her fingers. Every spectator seemed to lean slightly forward, the subtle rustle of clothing and the faint squeak of shoes on the marble floor accentuating the weight of expectation that hung in the air. The sunlight shifted once more, illuminating the dust floating lazily in the high windows, and casting long, deliberate shadows across the faces of those present. Ryan Cole straightened his shoulders, attempting to regain the composure that had been fraying with each second, yet there was a tremor in his gaze, a hesitation that betrayed the uncertainty now creeping into his carefully constructed confidence. Jasmine watched him with the patience of someone who had studied the rhythm of power, each breath measured, each blink deliberate, reading the minute fluctuations in his posture, the twitch of his hand near his belt, the slight narrowing of his eyes. The courtroom itself seemed to respond, the murmur of the air conditioning mingling with the distant shuffle of papers from the clerks, a chorus of background noise that emphasized the stillness between them. A faint cough from the back of the gallery drew Jasmine's attention briefly, and she allowed a slight tilt of her head, acknowledging the presence of the audience without disrupting her focus. Ryan's voice cut through, the quiet, low but firm, attempting to reassert control over the room with words designed to provoke. Yet Jasmine did not flinch, her posture unmoved, the calm precision of her movements reinforcing her authority. Her mind traced the sequence of events that had brought her here, the meticulous planning, the legal strategies, the countless simulations of scenarios in which she had anticipated every possible move by an opponent, and she allowed a subtle confidence to emanate from her, invisible but felt by those in the room who could sense the shift in energy. Outside, the sunlight continued its journey across the high windows, and the way it fell upon the floor emphasized the contrast between the shadows and the brightness, a visual metaphor for the balance of power in the room. Ryan stepped closer, a deliberate motion meant to intimidate, yet every movement was mirrored in Jasmine's mind, anticipated and accounted for, each second expanding into a taut rhythm of expectation. She observed the smallest details, the slight tilt of his head, the tightening of his jaw, the subtle shifting of weight from one foot to the other, and allowed herself a measured exhale, a silent assertion of patience and control. The spectators, sensing the tension, adjusted their positions, their whispers a low undertone that made the courtroom feel alive, a living entity responding to the poised energy of the senator and the faltering certainty of the officer. Jasmine's gaze swept across the room once more, landing on each observer briefly, ensuring that their attention was anchored yet unobtrusive, reinforcing the awareness that she was fully in command of the moment. Ryan's hands flexed slightly at his sides, the tension in his shoulders growing, and Jasmine, with the quiet precision she had cultivated over years of preparation, allowed the timing to reach its perfect alignment. Each heartbeat, each slight movement in the room became part of a larger rhythm, a cadence of anticipation that drew the focus of every individual toward the imminent unfolding of authority and the silent, inevitable reclamation of balance in the space. The marble floors reflected the subtle shift in energy, light and shadow dancing across the surfaces as if in recognition of the unspoken power dynamics, and Jasmine remained immovable, the embodiment of composure and control, waiting for the precise moment when her presence would fully resonate, commanding attention, respect, and acknowledgement of the equilibrium that had been silently restored. The faint echo of the gavel faded into the background as Senator Jasmine Brooks shifted her weight slightly, her presence commanding the attention of every individual in the courtroom without a single word. The sunlight streaming through the high windows painted the room in a warm, diffused glow, highlighting the polished wood and the worn marble floors that had witnessed countless proceedings, yet today felt different, charged with an almost tangible anticipation. Officer Ryan Cole's eyes darted around, searching for allies in the crowd, but all he found were curious stares and a silent recognition that he was no longer in control. The subtle hum of the air conditioning mixed with the soft scratching of pens and the shuffle of papers as clerks and spectators adjusted their positions, each sound amplified in the stillness, emphasizing the weight of the moment. Jasmine's gaze remained steady, scanning the faces in the room briefly before returning to the officer, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of her lips, a silent acknowledgement of the precision with which she had arrived at this moment. Every detail mattered. The angle of her briefcase, the placement of the documents on the stand, the way her hands rested lightly on the polished surface, all contributing to an unspoken strategy that had been rehearsed in her mind for weeks, anticipating every possible response, every attempt to disrupt her composure. Ryan Cole shifted slightly, the polished leather of his shoes squeaking against the marble, a small but telling signal of his mounting uncertainty. Jasmine allowed a slow exhale to escape her lungs, deliberate and controlled, letting it fill the room subtly, the rhythm of her breathing a contrast to the tension coiling in the officer's shoulders. The whispers from the gallery, barely audible at first, grew in strength as the audience became aware of the subtle shift in power, a collective recognition that the balance was tipping in favor of someone who had been underestimated for far too long. Outside, the sunlight continued to move across the high windows, casting long shadows that stretched across the marble, creating a visual representation of the underlying tension and the quiet assertion of authority that Jasmine embodied. Each second stretched, elongated by the anticipation, every minute gesture charged with meaning, the slight tilt of her head, the measured blink of her eyes, the poised adjustment of her posture, all reinforcing The impression that she was fully aware, fully prepared, and entirely in command of the unfolding moment. Ryan Cole's hand brushed momentarily against his belt, an unconscious attempt at reassurance. Yet Jasmine's eyes caught the movement, noting the subtle tremor in his fingers, the slight narrowing of his gaze, and the hesitation that now permeated his posture. She did not speak, did not gesture, allowing the silence to swell and fill the courtroom, the tension wrapping around the observers like an invisible force, drawing their focus entirely toward her. The rustle of papers, the quiet shuffle of feet, the distant hum of electrical systems, all merged into a backdrop that made every subtle change in the room feel amplified, each movement, each breath, each glance carrying significance. Jasmine's mind traced the sequence of events in precise order, the careful calculations, the legal maneuvering, the strategic placement of evidence and perception, all aligning perfectly with the current moment. She remained calm, composed, unshaken, allowing the energy of the room to settle into a rhythm she controlled, every heartbeat in synchrony with her own measured tempo, each observer drawn into the unfolding assertion of rightful authority, waiting for the moment when the invisible currents of control would be fully revealed and recognized by all present. The tension in the courtroom thickened as Senator Jasmine Brooks shifted slightly, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the polished oak stand, each movement deliberate, measured, a silent assertion of presence and control. The sunlight through the tall arched windows highlighted the fine dust suspended in the air, creating a halo of light around her figure, the subtle play of brightness and shadow enhancing the intensity of the room. Officer Ryan Cole's eyes darted nervously, the faint glint of sweat forming along his brow as he adjusted his tie, a small gesture betraying the cracks in his composure. The spectators remained still, their collective attention focused on the silent standoff, the rustle of papers, and the soft shuffle of feet, the only sounds punctuating the heavy quiet. Jasmine's gaze swept across the courtroom, briefly pausing on the jurors, each face carefully observing, reading, reacting in their own subtle ways, yet none dared disrupt the balance she exuded. Her mind raced with the cadence of preparation and anticipation, recalling the countless hours of meticulous planning, rehearsals, and mental exercises that had honed her ability to control the room without raising her voice, to assert authority without overt action, to allow the natural flow of tension to align perfectly with her presence. The sunlight shifted slightly, painting new angles on the marble floor, casting elongated shadows across the faces of those seated, a visual reminder of the weight of observation and the heightened awareness of everyone present. Ryan Cole's hand twitched ever so slightly, a reflexive attempt to maintain authority, and Jasmine's eyes caught the subtle movement, noting the tension in his fingers and the faint narrowing of his gaze. She remained poised, her breathing slow and controlled, each exhale harmonizing with the rhythm of the room, allowing the energy to build incrementally, each observer's focus drawing closer, tighter, until the silence itself seemed to resonate with the unspoken command of her presence. The faint click of a pen from the front row and the soft murmur of a shifting audience member accentuated the stillness, emphasizing the contrast between her composed demeanor and the subtle agitation radiating from the officer. Jasmine allowed her gaze to soften slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of the shared awareness between herself and the audience, reinforcing the perception that she was fully in command, that the outcome was unfolding exactly as she had envisioned, the natural rhythm of patience and authority guiding the room. Each second stretched, elongated by anticipation, the small movements of the officer magnified against the steady calm of her stance, the minimal adjustments in posture, the slight inclination of her head, the careful placement of her hands, all contributing to a larger strategy of silent influence, demonstrating control without the need for words. Outside, the sunlight continued to trace its path across the upper windows, the shifting patterns illuminating different angles of the marble floors, reflecting off the polished wood, creating subtle changes in the ambience that mirrored the internal dynamics of authority, patience, and expectation. Jasmine's eyes returned to the officer, steady and unwavering, noting every subtle shift, every micro-expression, each one adding to the tapestry of anticipation and silent command, each observer drawn into the unfolding equilibrium. Each breath, each heartbeat, each moment synchronized with the quiet yet undeniable assertion of her presence in the room, preparing for the precise timing when the full measure of her control and awareness would be recognized and felt by all. The subtle shift in the room's energy became almost palpable as Senator Jasmine Brooks adjusted the papers in her briefcase, the faint rustle blending with the quiet murmur of the gallery, a soft counterpoint to the tension radiating from Officer Ryan Cole. Sunlight continued to filter through the high windows, streaks of warm gold and pale amber casting long, deliberate shadows that shifted slowly across the polished marble floors, accentuating the intricate patterns of the courtroom. Each observer, from the jurors to the spectators perched along the back rows, seemed to hold their breath, caught in the rhythm of anticipation that Jasmine orchestrated without a single word. Ryan Cole's eyes flicked toward the edges of the room, seeking reassurance, seeking recognition from colleagues, or a subtle sign that he still retained influence. Yet each glance met only quiet faces and measured expressions that conveyed nothing but attentiveness and awareness. Jasmine's posture remained impeccable, her back straight, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the stand, and every movement, from the slight tilt of her head to the controlled lift of her chin, conveyed authority, presence, and a calm readiness that no one could misinterpret. The faint hum of the air conditioning combined with the soft scraping of chairs as spectators shifted ever so slightly, creating a backdrop that heightened the awareness of every micro-expression, every imperceptible gesture. Outside, the sunlight moved along the windows, highlighting the textures of the stone walls, the delicate veining in the marble, and the polished grain of the wooden benches, each detail reflecting the meticulous care and precision with which Jasmine conducted herself. Officer Cole shifted in his stance, a small adjustment, yet Jasmine noted it with the keen awareness of someone trained to observe minute fluctuations in energy and intent, reading the smallest tremor in posture, the subtle tightening of a jaw, the fractional narrowing of eyes, all indicators of the uncertainty creeping into his mind. She allowed a faint, controlled exhale, the rhythm of her breathing steady and measured, each sound barely audible, but carrying an invisible weight, grounding the room and drawing attention to the tension between anticipation and action. The gallery responded almost instinctively, leaning slightly forward, eyes widening, subtle murmurs carried by the air of expectancy, but never rising into disruption, as if the room itself acknowledged the delicate balance Jasmine maintained. Her mind moved with the precision of a seasoned strategist, retracing each step of preparation, calculating the alignment of perception and reality, considering the rhythm of movements, gestures, and glances, ensuring that every observer, consciously or unconsciously, experienced the controlled unfolding of authority and awareness. The light continued to play across the floor and walls, casting subtle shifts in brightness that mirrored the oscillating tension, and Jasmine's eyes followed each movement with meticulous attention, her focus unwavering, aware of every flicker, every shift, every nuance that contributed to the cumulative sense of order and influence she exerted silently. Ryan Cole's posture reflected the growing pressure, his attempts to maintain dominance increasingly fragile, the slight twitch of his hands, the shallow inhale, the imperceptible tremor in his shoulders, all betraying the steadiness he had tried to project. Jasmine allowed the moment to extend, letting the anticipation build without interruption, each heartbeat in the room aligning with the measured cadence of her presence, the collective awareness of the gallery tightening the invisible threads of attention, until the room itself seemed to resonate with the poised, unshakable authority she embodied, a silent command felt by every person present, preparing the stage for the inevitable reveal of competence, control, and unassailable mastery of the situation. Senator Jasmine Brooks allowed a faint, measured smile to brush her lips as the room seemed to hold its collective breath, the sunlight filtering through the tall windows casting shifting patterns across the polished marble floors, accentuating the subtle movements of the audience and the tension that radiated from Officer Ryan Cole. Each spectator's gaze was drawn toward her with an almost magnetic focus, the quiet shuffle of papers and the soft creak of chairs the only sounds punctuating the otherwise still air, heightening the anticipation. She shifted her stance slightly, the subtle movement deliberate and unhurried, a testament to her control and awareness of every detail in the room, from the faint tremor of the officer's fingers to the careful alignment of documents on the wooden stand. Ryan Cole's eyes flicked nervously across the gallery, searching for a trace of support, a hint that the situation might still be in his favor, but he found only measured stares and the subtle acknowledgement of witnesses fully aware of the shifting power dynamic. Jasmine's gaze swept calmly over the jurors, the stenographer, and the seated public, each individual contributing unconsciously to the silent rhythm she orchestrated, their movements and expressions harmonizing with the poised energy she exuded. Outside, the sun continued its slow journey across the sky, casting elongated shadows that stretched across the courtroom, highlighting the intricate details of the marble and wood, the subtle play of light reinforcing the quiet gravity of the unfolding moment. The air seemed heavier now, charged with anticipation, as Jasmine's breathing remained steady, controlled, each inhale and exhale carefully measured to reinforce her presence and command without a single word. She let her eyes flicker briefly to the edge of the room, observing the minute reactions, the soft shifting of a shoulder here, the faint tightening of a jaw there, all small indicators of the underlying tension and awareness that she skillfully maintained. Ryan Cole's posture shifted again, a reflexive adjustment, and Jasmine noted the motion with keen precision, aware of the growing uncertainty in his stance, the subtle hesitation in his movements betraying the waning confidence he had tried to project. The murmurs of the gallery grew slightly louder, not in disruption but in anticipation, a barely perceptible hum that served to accentuate the silence surrounding her, the contrast emphasizing her composure and the careful orchestration of presence she maintained. Each heartbeat in the room seemed to synchronize with the tension, the subtle alignment of focus and awareness creating an invisible cadence that carried through the air, binding the observer's attention to the poised figure at the front. Jasmine's mind traced the precise sequence of moments, the calculated anticipation of every reaction, every glance, every slight movement that could influence the perception of authority, and she allowed herself a subtle exhale, the sound almost imperceptible yet filled with quiet confidence, reinforcing the unspoken assertion of control. The sunlight continued to shift, the patterns on the floors and walls subtly changing, reflecting the rhythm of the room and the poised energy that Jasmine projected, every detail perfectly aligned with the invisible architecture of observation, awareness, and authority that she had mastered. Officer Cole's hand twitched slightly at his side, a minute and telling movement, and Jasmine's eyes met his with steady calm, noting the imperceptible tension in his shoulders, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the flicker of uncertainty that now shadowed his attempts at maintaining dominance, while the audience remained captivated, sensing the poised orchestration of control, the quiet and deliberate preparation for the moment when authority would be fully and undeniably asserted. Senator Jasmine Brooks took a deliberate step forward, the polished wood of the courtroom floor echoing faintly beneath her shoes, each motion precise, controlled, a visible expression of the authority she embodied. Sunlight shifted across the high windows, illuminating the subtle grain of the marble and the carefully arranged benches, creating patterns of light and shadow that moved with the room like a living, breathing entity, reflecting the slow but deliberate progression of tension. Officer Ryan Cole's posture stiffened as he noticed the subtle changes, his eyes darting briefly to the gallery and back, attempting to reclaim composure, yet every gesture betrayed a growing awareness that the balance of control was no longer in his favor. The spectators, sensing the quiet shift, leaned forward slightly, the soft shuffle of feet and faint rustle of clothing accentuating the gravity of the moment, every detail magnified by the focused anticipation that hung in the air. Jasmine's hands rested lightly on the edge of the stand, her fingers tracing the polished surface almost imperceptibly, each small movement deliberate, reinforcing her presence and the silent rhythm of authority she maintained. Her gaze swept across the room with measured precision, noting the subtle reactions of each juror, clerk, and onlooker, the smallest flicker of attention, the nearly imperceptible change in posture, the slight adjustment of a hand, all converging into a tapestry of awareness that she skillfully navigated. The sunlight played across her features, highlighting the calm intensity in her eyes and the measured set of her jaw, each detail underscoring the unspoken confidence that radiated from her every motion. Ryan Cole's hands shifted slightly, a reflexive motion of uncertainty, and Jasmine noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders, the tightening of his jaw, the fleeting hesitation that betrayed the fragile veneer of dominance he had tried to project. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the soft scrape of chairs punctuating the silence, amplifying every slight movement, every measured blink, every breath that Jasmine allowed herself to take. She moved her eyes slowly, deliberately, tracing the subtle patterns of attention in the room, ensuring that every observer, whether consciously or not, was drawn into the unfolding dynamic, fully aware of the poised control she commanded. The polished floor reflected the shifting light, emphasizing the contrast between shadow and brightness, mirroring the tension that stretched taut across the room as Jasmine allowed the anticipation to build, a careful orchestration of presence and awareness. Ryan Cole's gaze flickered, searching for a foothold, a sign of leverage or authority, yet he found none, the room's attention now fully anchored to the steady, deliberate energy Jasmine projected. Each heartbeat seemed to resonate in time with the controlled cadence of her breathing, every micro-movement amplified in the stillness, every slight shift in focus a reminder of the inevitable progression toward the moment she had meticulously prepared for. The gallery, the jurors, the clerks, even the distant observers, all seemed to participate unconsciously in the alignment of attention and awareness, drawn into the silent choreography that Jasmine directed without a single word, her calm composure acting as the axis around which the room's energy rotated. The sunlight continued its gradual movement across the upper windows, casting elongated shadows that traveled across the marble and wood, a visual echo of the invisible currents of authority, patience, and anticipation that Jasmine maintained. She allowed a subtle shift of her weight, the faintest adjustment, imperceptible to all but those attuned to the energy in the room, reinforcing the silent assertion of control and setting the stage for the precise moment when the culmination of awareness, preparation, and quiet power would fully manifest, acknowledged by every eye, every observer, and every breath in the chamber. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted subtly as Senator Jasmine Brooks moved with the quiet precision that had defined her presence from the moment she entered, her steps measured, her posture impeccable, and her eyes sweeping across every individual, each glance deliberate, capturing the faintest flicker of reaction, the smallest shift in attention, and aligning it with the invisible rhythm she orchestrated. Sunlight continued to stream through the tall windows, illuminating the polished marble floors and casting elongated patterns across the wooden benches, the shifting light reflecting off the brass accents and creating an almost tangible sense of anticipation in the room. Officer Ryan Cole's attempts at regaining composure grew increasingly evident in the minor adjustments of his stance, the subtle tensing of his hands at his sides, the brief, cautious glances he cast toward the gallery, all betraying the gradual erosion of the control he had once assumed as his own. Jasmine allowed a faint, controlled inhale and exhale, each breath deliberate, reinforcing the silent cadence of authority she maintained, a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with the collective heartbeat of the observers, drawing their attention and focus entirely to her presence. The gentle hum of the ventilation system and the soft rustle of papers created a background texture that accentuated the stillness, highlighting the subtle interplay of energy between the poised figure at the stand and the officer whose confidence now wavered. Her gaze swept across the jurors, the clerks, the spectators, and the distant observers, noting the micro-expressions, the slight inclinations of heads, the nearly imperceptible shifts in posture, all contributing to a tapestry of awareness that she navigated with effortless precision. The sunlight moved gradually across the room, casting long, slow shadows that shifted over the marble and wood surfaces, a visual reflection of the tension and anticipation that coiled in the space like an unseen current. Jasmine's hands rested lightly on the polished edge of the stand, the faintest movements purposeful, a subtle tracing that reinforced her presence, her control, and her awareness of every nuance in the room. Ryan Cole's eyes flicked repeatedly, searching for an anchor, a sign of support, or a momentary reprieve, yet he found only measured attention and poised observation, leaving him increasingly isolated in the awareness of the room. Jasmine allowed her eyes to linger briefly on each corner of the gallery, observing the quiet alignment of attention, the slight shifts in expressions, and the subtle gestures that conveyed awareness without disruption, reinforcing the sense that every individual was now drawn into the controlled energy she exuded. The polished floor reflected the shifting sunlight and the subtle motions of the observers, highlighting the contrast between shadow and illumination, between anticipation and control, and emphasizing the deliberate, steady pace with which she managed the room's energy. Each heartbeat, each breath, each subtle motion contributed to an expanding tension that was both silent and absolute, a quiet acknowledgement of the poised mastery that Jasmine maintained and the growing recognition by all present that authority, awareness, and presence were fully embodied in her every gesture, every glance, and every measured movement, setting the stage for the culmination of control and the unmistakable affirmation of her competence and composure. The courtroom seemed to exhale collectively as the final measure of anticipation reached its peak, every individual attuned to the subtle shifts in posture, the faint flicker of attention, and the poised presence that Senator Jasmine Brooks maintained with absolute precision. Sunlight streamed in through the tall windows, dancing across the polished marble floors and the dark wooden benches, creating elongated patterns of light and shadow that moved imperceptibly with the passing hours, reflecting the quiet passage of tension and awareness in the room. Officer Ryan Cole's shoulders slumped ever so slightly, the faintest tremor in his hands betraying the gradual collapse of the confidence he had tried so carefully to project, while Jasmine's gaze remained steady, encompassing the entirety of the space, noting each reaction, each minute adjustment in expression and posture, weaving them into an invisible map of control and comprehension. The subtle hum of the ventilation and the soft scrape of papers provided a backdrop of sound that seemed to underscore the measured calm she exuded, each breath synchronized to the invisible rhythm of authority that now dominated the room. The spectators, from the jurors to the gallery, leaned forward almost imperceptibly, their attention locked on the poised figure at the front, each whisper of movement, each tiny shift of gaze reinforcing the gravity of the unfolding equilibrium. Jasmine's hands rested lightly on the edge of the polished oak stand, the smallest motions deliberate, a faint trace of movement signaling awareness, attentiveness, and a quiet command that required no overt assertion. Sunlight shifted gradually across the room, altering the patterns on the floors and walls, casting the room in a sequence of warm highlights and soft shadows that mirrored the subtle flow of power, control, and observation she projected, the interplay of light emphasizing the invisible currents of energy she guided effortlessly. Ryan Cole's eyes darted with growing uncertainty, a search for foothold, for a sign that influence could be reclaimed, yet all he found were measured, unbroken gazes and the quiet, unwavering focus of those who were aligned, consciously or unconsciously, with the rhythm Jasmine orchestrated. The audience remained silent, each observer participating in the moment, their collective awareness amplifying the presence she maintained, every heartbeat seemingly synchronized with the slow, deliberate cadence of her calm control. Jasmine's gaze moved deliberately, scanning corners, faces, and details with a precision that allowed her to anticipate every potential movement, every reaction, every flicker of doubt, weaving the awareness of the entire room into the seamless flow of quiet authority she projected. The polished floors reflected the shifting sunlight and the subtle movements of the individuals within the space, enhancing the sense of dimensionality and depth, highlighting the contrast between the poised calm of the senator and the faltering attempts at dominance from the officer. Each micro-movement, each measured breath, each carefully considered glance contributed to the culmination of controlled authority, the room itself seeming to respond to the poised energy Jasmine projected. The jurors shifted slightly, the clerks adjusted their positions, and the gallery leaned forward in quiet recognition, all participating in the unspoken acknowledgement of the full command of presence, awareness, and mastery she had maintained from the very first moment, preparing the stage for the inevitable acknowledgement of competence, control, and the subtle, undeniable assertion of rightful authority that resonated throughout the chamber with perfect clarity, every observer fully aware of. The quiet reclamation of equilibrium and the consummate demonstration of measured power.